Okay, so continuing these exercises in their reverse order, like I suggested you do, you would come to number 3 here, which says implement the functionality of the above program using a dictionary instead of a list. So obviously we can't do that until we've done number 2. Now, the bad news is that number 2 is kind of a doozy. So let's go through it here. Thankfully, they do have an answer available if you want to get some help for this problem. If you want to take a peek at the answer to see if you're on the right track, that sort of thing, that's great. Make sure you make use of that wisely and don't completely circumvent the actual learning benefit that you can gain from doing the problem on your own. Same thing with these videos, right? Try to do the problem first. But that is neither here nor there. Let's jump right into it, shall we? The problem says, write a program that will function as a gradebook, allowing a user, the professor or teacher, to enter the class roster for a course along with each student's cumulative grade. It then prints the class roster along with the average cumulative grade. Grades are on a 0 to 100% scale. Use toList, grades, and students, and the enumerate function in your solution. So, that is a lot. Thankfully, though, we can take it bit by bit, piece by piece, and really work through this problem and solve it out. It is a lot like the problem with the worker time cards that we already did, but instead of just being a single function, it's going to be an entire program that does this. So that means that we will probably honestly just want to run it all in main, simply because I don't think that there's going to be anything really that we can reasonably factor out into functions in order to make this easier. So let's go through it, do it. We'll see that this is what our final input/output should look like. So the user should enter names, and then it should prompt them for grades. And then it should print the class roster with grades next to names, and then the average grade at the bottom. So let's start by simply defining main and getting our call to main written up down here with our magic statement: if double under name equals the string double under main and main. Give ourselves one extra line at the bottom. That's just Python stylistics. I don't know why that is. That's just how it works. So this is going to be a kind of a big multi-part problem here. So let's break it down to the parts that we need to actually do, right? So the first thing is we need to allow the user to enter names until they are done, and then we want to prompt the user for grades for a grade for each name. So because we have the words for each in here, that should instantly tell us, as we're thinking about it out loud to ourselves, that, oh, that means I'm going to probably need to use a for loop for this. And that is correct. That would be the correct assumption. And then we need to print the roster in this format up here. And we need to calculate and print the average grade. Alright, so those are the 4 big things that we need to do. There will probably be many things underneath these things, but those are the 4 big kind of main things we need to knock out of the way. So, let's get to it. We want the user to enter names until they're done, which means that we're going to want a while loop. right? We are going to want a while loop, which means that we to need to actually get a value going ahead of time, a variable going ahead of time, to use as our break for that while loop. So what's going to go inside the while loop? Let me think about that first. Well, inside the while loop, I'm going to want to get the student's name from an input, and I want to add it to a list. So I'm going to make comments here. Get student name from input, add name to list. What else do I want to do inside my while loop? I'm going to want to I don't want to allow the user to stop entering names somehow. So we can make sure that the while loop runs at least once by initializing an empty input string. So let me do that. Going to initialize an empty input string. I'm going to call it student name. I'm going to call it equal to an empty space here. That way, when we get to our while check down later in the problem, it won't immediately pass over the while check. So, student name is empty to a space, or equal to a space. We could set it to something else, like we could set it to like null, or like null. There it is. No, all capital. We can set it to 0. We can set it to false. Whatever. Because the while loop that we're going to use is going to look like this. It's going to be while student name does not equal let's call it done. While the student name does not equal done. So we can set its student name up here to whatever we want. I'm going to set it equal to 0. No, it should be an empty string. Set it equal to empty string. While student name does not equal done, we want the user to enter names until they're finished. So we will prompt the user and set student name equal to an input. And we will say type new student name or type done to finish. Alright, I think it's good. Do that. Get student name from list. Okay, so we got student name from input. We need to add it to a list, but we don't have a list to add it to. So let's create a list outside here. Like the problem tells us, we need to use 2 lists. We need to use a list for students and a list for grades, and we need to use the enumerate function at some point. Okay, so I'll create students and grades immediately right off the bat. That way we can use them later in the function. And then I will, down here, add student name to list. So students append student name. And I already did this. So that's good. Is that the whole while loop? Let me think to myself. Yes, that's, I think, everything we need for this while loop. Or is it? No, it isn't, because if the user types done here, it will add done to the list here. So if user did not type done, add name to list. So if student name does not equal done, then do this. So I want, yes, that's what I want. Okay. That's our entire wallet. Then we want to prompt the user for a grade for each name. Well, we can do that. We can say for student in students, we want to set grade. Do you want to do that? Yeah, that should be fine. Grade equals an input from the user, and if we're doing it the same way it looks up here, we need to do grade for, and then concatenate the student's name, and then concatenate a colon and a space on the end, and that allows them to enter the grade. And simply we will just append the grade to grades. Nice and easy. That's no problem whatsoever. And we need to print the roster. So again, I'm going to probably want a for loop. So let's see what the roster needs to look like. It needs to say class roster, and then it needs to have each student and their grade in parentheses. Okay, so let's do that. Let's first print the statement class roster. So class roster, I added in a new line character here because the previous I want it to get separated by an interspace. If you look here, an interspace from the actual input. So I just for aesthetics, basically. And then I want to iterate through the students and get the student and their respective grade. So this is actually hard to do because I need to be able to get both the student and their grade, right? So we could do for index in range length students, and then do something like print students index plus etc, etc, etc. But if we use enumerate, we can get a little bit more specific with our syntax, and we can be a little bit more clear in our writing, right? So for index comma student and enumerate students, so each time through the list we're going to get a new student and a new index. Then we want to our print statement is going to be something like the student's name, which is just student, plus a space and a parentheses, and then we want their grade, which we can just get by doing grades index of index, plus another parentheses. That should work. But since this is a number, since the grade is stored as a number, is it? No, it's stored as a string. Do I want it stored as a string? I don't want it stored as a string, actually. Let me store grade as a number and input here. That is going to make it so when I want to calculate the average later, I can do that much more easily rather than having to cast everything to ints later on. So I'll cast it to int there and cast it to string here. There we go. Um, let's just see if this works so far. I should have been testing this along the way, really, truly. So we already have bad input. What did I do? Oh, I have one extra something somewhere. Alright, so saying that this should not be at the end, which is obviously wrong. So I've messed up somewhere else. Alright, there we go. Save and run. So type a new student name or type done to finish. Type Ryan. And then type done. And grade for Ryan, let's say 67. That should just print out class roster Ryan 67. Good. That's great. Last thing we need to do is calculate and print the average grade. So on their version, they have it separated by an enter space. So we will do the same. We will print the average. So let's first get the average. So let's set average equal to the sum of all the numbers and grades divided by the length of grades to get the number of items of grades. So we'll just average out the grades, and then we will return the average grade, or rather print the average grade. So new line character to get that extra enter space, and then average grade, and I'm modeling it based on this up here, and space, and then plus the average, which we need to cast as a string average. And let's save it and run it. And we got Ryan, and we got Mike, and we got Lynn, and we're done. Great for Ryan, 76, great for Mike, 84, great for Lynn, let's say 95. And it should print out 76, 84, 95. Average grade is 85.0. So there we go. Awesome. I know this video is running long, but I'm going to do number 3 here as well, just because it's going to be easier. So I'm going to copy my whole thing from up here down to here. And then I'm going to replace my list functionality with dictionaries. So I'm going to create an empty dictionary up here instead of a list. And I'm gonna, instead of students, I'm gonna call it gradebook. Okay, this is the same, except down here, instead of students append student name, I'm going to do gradebook student name equals, and we can set it to 0 just to initialize it. Basically, we're making a dictionary that includes the student's name, and underneath the student's name is their grade. So we call it gradebook to get student name equal to 0. So if I enter Ryan as my student name, it's going to set gradebook Ryan to 0. Then for grades, it's very, very simple. So for student in gradebook, we just set student, sorry, give me a second. We set gradebook student equal to that input. That's all we need to do, is we just need to set the gradebook, the student's entry in the gradebook, directly equal to that input. And then for the class roster, we don't need this enumerate statement anymore. No longer necessary. We can say for student in gradebook, we want to print the student's name plus the student's grade, which we can get by doing string on gradebook index of student. And then for averages, this is going to be a little bit different. We want to sum up the length of gradebook. We want to divide the sum of all the grades in the gradebook by the length of gradebook. We can do that by calling gradebook dot values. which is the same as the dot keys method we used earlier. We can go through and sum up the gradebook values and then return the length of the gradebook, and then all of that should work. Let's do Ryan, Mike, Lynn. Whoops, messed up. Done. Okay. Try again. Ryan, Mike, Lynn. Done. Ryan 76, Mike 34, Lynn 94. And it should print out class roster Ryan, Mike, Lynn. 76, 34, 94, average grade 68.0. So you can see it is much simpler with a dictionary than trying to juggle two separate lists, because we can just simply store grades in the gradebook. We could also make a gradebook program where the user can enter multiple grades inside of a single student and just append them to a list, right? And then average a student's grade and average the entire class grade. That is the functionality that dictionaries allow us to have access to that we wouldn't get traditionally with list. So you can see that dictionaries for a lot of things are much more powerful than list.